Hello and welcome all to the inaugural Mokak Oration. I'm Danielle Wood, Chair of the Productivity Commission. I am delighted to be here tonight on beautiful Ngunnawal, Ngambri country. And before we get started, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Ngambri, Canberra, Wagalu, Ngunnawal, Wildjuri custodian Paul Garawa House. Paul is going to be providing us with the welcome to country this evening. Over to you, Paul.
Amandanguwa, Waragawari, Daniel, thank you very much. And Buru Marambang, Yari Marang Maranya Mayin. Good afternoon, everyone. Noya Goya Malang, Marambang Malang. It's wonderful, it's beautiful. Nina Nain Mura Buramba Bira, Goyambana, Nina Nurambangol, to be able to share this welcome the country with you all. Yinjamara Bala Rom. Maranya, Yinjamara and your family, my respects to your family on behalf of my mother, Dr. Matilda. Yinjamara Bala, Auntie Pat, wonderful to see Auntie Pat, and everyone here today. Yuandu, Paul Girawa House. My name is Paul Girawa House. Nadu, Maradu, Mare, Biringo, Gojigango, Nyambri, Cambri, Nuru, Nurumbango. I was born here at the centre of my ancestral country at the old Canberra Hospital. God bless it. Anyone born in the old Canberra Hospital? Look at all the hospital alumni. Giyalang is our belonging. Niaway Gunangijil is our identity. And it's wonderful that Rom has brought his identity, his Mawang, his family, into his previous role as the Productivity Commissioner. And the hard work, we acknowledge that, Rom. So Yilangalangbu, Gibabango, Wogabu, Migabu, Diranil Bang May. And ladies and gentlemen, and young men, young women, distinguished guests, Nyari and Jamali, Nyambri, Cambri, Wogalu, Wallabaloa, Nunawa, Nagarigo, Waradri, Mujigang, Yanangbu Jayandu. My respects to Nyambri, Cambri, Wogalu, Wallabaloa, Nunawa, Nagarigo, Waradri, elders past and present. Nyari and Jamarabu, Mujigangu, Nurumbanjigu, Ninya Yiridu. My respects to all people, First Nation people from all parts of the country. Nyambri, Cambri, Wogalu, Wallabaloa, Mayingain, Banya, Ninyuga, Nurumbangaldara. Nyambri, Cambri, Wogalu, Wallabaloa. People welcome you all to country. Nadu Wuragabigi, Balabambo Gubu, Balagi Bangubu, Gongulila, Dumbali now Murwai, Marumbo. We listen to the old people, the ancestors, the elders, and they show us the good path, the right path, the straight path. Maramara Muru, creating pathways, Muruwaro, on track, and Dulagang Muru, straight path. Guingulila, Bilingali now, Yama Mali now, Walla Mali now. Our old people, they nurture us, they guide us, they protect us. Mamba wara naminyagu, wuraga binya wura darego, winning galago baligo, looking to see, listening to hear, and learning to understand. Nyani injamali nurabangila balanin walawin galinga, bangbo yanangin, nyani mawang yao biligi gila, yaman bilgiri yani marambo bagarigan. We respect country, we look after country for our children, and we teach and we learn what is right for all on country. Our welcome to country is always made in the spirit of peace, harmony, and reconciliation for all people of modern Australia. And our main aim as local custodians is to establish an atmosphere of mutual respect through the acknowledgement of our ancestors and the recognition of our rights to declare our special place in the pre and post history of the Canberra region. The name Canberra is derived from the name of our people and country, the Nyambri, Cambri, Canberra. And we talk about country all the time. Muran Maginya Yinjamara, Muramuru, Wirimbira, Nurambango. Living a respectful way of life cares for country. Yinjamara, Wirimbira, Marandugubu, Gihiragubu, Yandagubu. Respect is taking responsibility for the now, the past, the present, and the future. Yinjamara, a powerful Yiraju word, ancestral word on country. It's a good nutrient word, and we gave those good nutrient words last year during the Yes campaign. Yinjamara, to go slow, be patient, be polite, be gentle, and take responsibility, uphold. Those good nutrient words we spoke about was the love, the respect, the safety, the belonging, the morals, the values, the sacrifice, the security, the nurturing and the sheltering and the caring. We gifted that last year. Our people gifted that right across the country. However, it was rejected. But we continue to gift our identity and our belonging to country, a powerful gift. And we thank all the people who went on the journey with us, and we continue that fight today. Yinjamara, Bala walam wanga dabu, murmadan dabu, bamayu guru gambiru, bango nara nara. Respect is in the grinding stones and the carved trees made long ago in country. Guinguli ala injamal gidjo, wijinga yina wangara daganda papa yirinigo. Respect is in how our matriarchs dig for yams in Mother Earth. Injamal gidjo, guinguli ala wing giran banana nurbala bua, guru gambiru bango nara nara. Respect is in the warmth of the campfire and the possum skin cloak that shelters all. Injamal gidjo, guinguli la balabirada bina 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 ya willawil wurawin nurambang. Respect is in the creeks and the rivers and the breeze quietly moving through country. Maragaladal walan mayan mayangalang. We hold fast to each other, we empower the people. Walan gunmala mara maragure, we be brave, we make change. Dirayawana murawara nawan bira. We get up, we stand up, and we show up, especially for Rom this evening. Mara mara nya nya girama maranya. Respect shapes us and lifts up the people. Yinjamal gijo mayangalang bu yando mayangalang do. Yinjamal gijo nya gear. Give respect and honour to all people from all parts of the country, and then people will respect you. Mara mara winanga gigalana mayin. Respect creates people who care for each other. So noi goyamalang, goyambana, nina nurambango. Welcome to country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that brilliant welcome, and it is a really wonderful way to kick off the oration. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the Ngunnawal Ngambri people as the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend that acknowledgement and respect to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. I also want to acknowledge we are joined by a few former Commission luminaries. We have Paul Lindwall, Richard Spencer, both former commissioners. We have a full set of current PC commissioners and a number of PC staff here, and that is very much reflects the strength of Rom's legacy and the regard that he has held within the organisation. So tonight is a really special one for us here at the Productivity Commission. As I said, this is the inaugural Mokak Oration, named in honour of Rom Mokak, the PC's first Indigenous Policy Commissioner. The Mokak Oration will be a yearly event that will recognise the achievements and contributions of prominent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to Australian public policy. Through this platform, we invite non-Indigenous people to listen, to think and to act in response to the topics raised. And it could not be more fitting to have the inaugural oration delivered by Rom himself. Following Rom's address, Dr. Gordon de Brewer, the Public Service Commissioner, will offer his reflections on Rom's speech. But now to introduce Rom. Rom is a Jagan man, a member of the Yawuru people. Prior to joining the PC, he was the Chief Executive Officer of the Lowitja Institute, Australia's National Institute for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Research. Before that, he held a wide range of policy, research and evaluation roles, including Chair of the National Health Leadership Forum, Chief Executive Officer of the Indigenous Doctors Association, and Director of the Australian Government's Office for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health. Rom was also the first Aboriginal Policy Officer in the New South Wales Government Ageing and Disability Department. When Rom was appointed as the PC's first Indigenous Policy Commissioner, the Treasurer noted, Mr Mokak will be crucial in leading the Commission's enhanced role in Indigenous policy and program evaluation and contribute more broadly to the Commission's independent advisory responsibilities across a range of economic, social and environmental issues. Rom did that, but so much more. In his 5-year tenure as a commissioner, Rom contributed his intellectual leadership across a range of projects, including the Closing the Gap review and the annual data compilation reports, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Visual Arts and Craft Inquiry, the Housing and Homelessness Agreement Review, the Indigenous Evaluation Strategy, the Overcoming Indigenous Disadvantage Report, and a research paper on working from home. You're a busy man, Rom. Rom set a very high bar on external engagement on these projects. He spoke widely with stakeholders and community members. Our team that collects our annual report statistics tells me we might expect to see a measurable dip in our engagement metrics this year, unless we all step up and channel Rom a little bit more. But of course, it wasn't about statistics for Rom. Seeking broader and meaningful engagement was a natural extension of his appreciation of the need to share power and to focus on the outcomes that First Nations Australians value. But beyond his contribution on individual projects, Rom changed the way the Commission thinks about issues. The fact is, conversations around the Commission table and the content of Commission reports look a lot different now than they did before Rom joined. The very active consideration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues and perspectives across recent inquiries, from philanthropy to early learning and care, is, to me, evidence of the way that Rom changed the questions PC asks. As former Chair Michael Brennan said to me when I asked him about Rom's legacy, the Commission would not have been able to do the Closing the Gap review 5 years ago. We just would not have been equipped to do so. I know there is more to do inside the PC, and Rom's work in spearheading the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Outcomes Framework is his legacy of institutional change. And we are grateful to have our new Indigenous Policy Commissioner, Selwyn, where are you? There you are. Selwyn Button, to carry this work forward. Rom's third contribution was as a wonderful colleague. As the cultural authority in our organisation, Rom supported our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff and participated in many challenging yet supportive yarns. For the rest of us, Rom's willingness to engage, to talk calmly, but at the same time to pull us out of our complacency is a gift that I will not forget. Being a challenger of accepted wisdom is never easy, but Rom has always done it with panache and grace, and I know tonight will be no different. I am delighted that Rom could be joined here tonight by his partner Deb, his children Louis and Maya. I know George is not able to make it. It's so wonderful to meet you all. I've heard so much about you, I sort of feel like we had met in the past, but thank you so much for joining us. With that, please welcome Rom to deliver the 2024 Mokak Oration.
Thanks, Danny. So I might just jump straight into it. I acknowledge the ancestors and elders of this special place, Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. And thank you, Paul, for your beautiful, warm welcome. You really, with your glass yidaki, that's something very special for anyone to experience. And so thank you very much for that. I give thanks especially to your mother, Auntie Dr. Matilda House, for her care and generosity over so many years. My people are from Jiring also known as Rubibi or Broome. My ancestors, to the beginning of time, are of that place. Their spirits, their dreams, their memories, and their blood are in that place. I come from a long line of strong Jugan women. My great-grandmother, Philomena Carter, is one of 33 apical ancestors under the native title, Yarru native title determination. Strong, resolute, determined. My grandmother, Chrysanthia Carter, moved her whole family to the Northern Territory in the late 1950s in pursuit of opportunity. She was defiant, proud and protective. My mother, Esme Nasser, her power was in her love and care for others, my greatest teacher, gentle, humble, full of grace. And like many Kimberley families who migrated to the Territory in the mid-1900s, ours travelled back and forth, keeping connected to kin and country. With my parents' separation in my early teens, travel back to Broome faded. Longing for connection to ancestral lands remained very strong. The colonial projects aim to dispossess First Peoples of our lands, our languages and our cultures reverberates throughout families across this continent to this day. And it compels us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to hold strong and to achieve justice and prosperity for our future generations. It is a question of our very survival, of our very existence. And I acknowledge and thank the countless elders and Indigenous family in Australia and beyond who have shared with me their wisdom and their love and nourished my soul. I'm forever grateful. And to all the people who have given so generously their wisdom, their guidance, their time, to you my deepest gratitude, young and old, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And as evidence in how I'm feeling, while somewhat daunted, my heart is filled to see many of you here today. Thank you, Danny, for your kind introduction. Though we worked together for only a short time, from day one I witnessed your passion and drive for the Commission to elevate its impact, to provide strong and sound policy advice to Australian governments. And this commitment is shared right across the Commission, colleagues around the Commission table and staff alike. And Danny recently highlighted the imperative to incorporate a range of perspectives and expertise in policy making to tackle the so-called wicked problems that cut across policy realms. This has always been my view in working with the Commission as well as in previous roles. And this is obviously does not just apply to the Commission. It is imperative and urgently needed to deliver Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander outcomes right across public policy making. And I would argue more than any policy challenge exercising the minds of policy makers today. And as the Commission has led many public policy debates throughout its life, so too must it be an exemplar for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander policy research and advice into the future. Last month, my partner Deb and I camped at Gundabooka National Park, just south of Bourke in northwestern New South Wales. This is a sacred place for the Nambar and Barkindji people. So we climbed to the top of Mount Gundabooka, as much breathless from the stunning views as the ascent. Back at the campsite that evening, we were hit by a massive dust storm, closely followed by a downpour of red-tinged raindrops. So fierce was the storm, we had to hold down our awning from ripping off our camper trailer and taking flight into the bush. After the front passed, we were gifted with the most stunningly beautiful pink rainbow, as I'd never seen before. And that night under the Milky Way, my mind went to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander policy. To the mountains we climb, the energy and effort, the breathlessness, sometimes in awe, sometimes for having the wind knocked out of us. The healing power of country, the weathering of storms, the clean-up afterwards, the power of working together, the emergence of new insights, the wider or sharper lens, the brilliance of the night sky, the love of people and family, the determination and resolve for better, and the comfort and power of our ancestral lands and the power and presence of our ancestors. And the power of knowing we will always be here as we have always been. As Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the policy-making game, our challenge, as well as our responsibility, is to hold clearly and intentionally in our minds and our hearts our old people who came before and the generations to come. We must navigate the mundane and the procedural. We must challenge systems of privilege that box us in as the other, and we must invest in these revolving door relationships, all the while honouring the imaginings of our ancestors and the dreams of our grandchildren's grandchildren. The Mokak Oration, it sounds really weird to say that, I've got to say, really weird. The Mokak Oration is about just doing that, to elevate the perspectives and priorities of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and to provide space for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander public policy contributors to share their impact on the future of our people. I'm humbled by the Commission, and I say that genuinely, Danny, establishing an oration in my name, and I look forward to sharing this space with you today. In 2018, Parliament passed legislation to establish the position of Indigenous Commissioner at the Productivity Commission. And in April 2019, more than 20 years after the Act establishing the Commission, I was appointed as the Indigenous Policy Evaluation Commissioner. On accepting the role, I wondered what value the work of the Commission holds for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities, and how would the Commission know if it had been successful in those efforts. I also wondered why it took legislative amendment for an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person to be appointed as a Commissioner to the Productivity Commission. You could ponder the same questions across many mainstream institutions. With my appointment, the Commission was for the first time, had for the first time an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person at the table of this preeminent advisory body to Australian governments, and somewhat delayed when considering that improving outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had long been agreed as a national policy priority. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have long been impacted, often to the detriment, by national policy priorities. But we are so much more than policy priorities. We are so much more than program recipients, and so far beyond needy vessels to build capacity. Too long have our people not had access to corridors of power or had our hands firmly on the levers of change. Agreements, strategies, frameworks, accompanied by implementation plans, monitoring and reporting processes, are simply not enough if structural reform and mindset shift are not addressed in real, tangible and measurable ways. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, our perspectives, our representation and our voice matter, and change must happen without delay. This is what the talk will be about today. How we must centre Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, tackle the imbalance and the abuse of power, and ensure future prosperity for our people. People, power and prosperity, essential elements for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's well-being. I've worked in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander policy for more than 30 years, and it has been an enormous privilege to have served our people. I've directly contributed to changing people's lives, is profoundly rewarding. As Danny mentioned, my first policy role was in New South Wales, focused on home and community care, ageing and disability, before I moved to the Commonwealth Department of Health and Ageing, covering policy areas such as eye health, health financing and substance use. I then spent 15 years heading up two key black organisations in this country, the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association and the Lowacha Institute. And lastly, the Productivity Commission for 5 years, completing my term in March of this year. A focus on people, power and prosperity has underscored much of the work that I've done, taking shape, for example, through establishing a collective Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice across jurisdictions within the home and community care sector, supporting children and their families in remote Australia through community-led, youth-centred supports and the introduction of a world-first low aromatic, unleaded fuel which dramatically reduced the prevalence of petrol sniffing, increasing the number and prominence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander doctors and medical students, and strengthening our impact collectively with Pacific kin organisation, medical association organisations across the Pacific, contributing to the rise and influence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peak bodies through the Indigenous Doctors Association when I was there, and providing support and mentorship to many emerging bodies, which led to what became the National Health Leadership Forum, and securing the future of the Lowitja Institute to drive community-determined research translation and evaluation. Since 1788, gains made by our people have all been hard fought. Nothing has been gifted to us. Where we have seen movement in the right direction, the gains have required smarts and strategy, intellect and innovation, and persistence and patience, and the pursuit of collective and community impact. And we have had many non-Indigenous colleagues and friends who've been with us side by side, offering their skills and talents to an Indigenous empowerment agenda. However, benevolence and beneficence have not always been our friend, and there are still areas where we still see little impact or little movement, and indeed movement in the wrong direction. This includes the health and well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in custody, whether adult or young people. The data continues to tell this damning story. And it also includes broader efforts to close the gap. The language and label of closing the gap sits uncomfortably with many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It speaks to non-Indigenous benchmarks against which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are measured, and the labels that work to define us. The labels that work to frame us in ways that reinforce deficit, problematised as a people, and forced into the proprietorship of our own disadvantage. And while there are attempts to bring nuance to this narrative by using strengths-based language, to the general public, politicians and policymakers, the baked-in negative narrative about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is ubiquitous. In the face of continuing poor outcomes, recycled proclamations of needing to do better, redoubling effort and recommitting to closing the gap simply do not cut it. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people see through these veiled words with 2020 vision. There is no silver bullet, but there are solutions. Solutions Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people have provided. Just look at the Yirrkala bark petitions, the Barunga statement and the Uluru statement from the heart. And thank you, Pat Anderson, for your work. But numerous calls on parliaments, governments and citizens to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and our priorities have been either ignored or rejected. Much like racial literacy or financial literacy, Indigenous literacy, that is, non-Indigenous people's understanding of self and relationship with Indigenous cultures, knowledges and histories is lacking. The nature, extent and pace of change to close the gap is still largely being determined by governments. And the pain associated with the outcome of the referendum for a voice to Parliament sits with many of us today, and we heard Paul speak about this earlier. To quote the Uluru statement, this is the torment of our powerlessness. And for many of you, these are not new insights, but I say ignorance can no longer be justified as a handbrake on progress. And I'm not immune from being a participant in the gap narrative in the early days. In 2005, the Social Justice Report, Commissioner Tom Calma published a chapter that set the goal of achieving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health equality within a generation. Tom argued for a right to health approach, that is to say, health as a human right. And like many, I stood with Tom and other Black Peak organisations in shaping the Close the Gap agenda. And with a collective of organisations, including AIDA, Indigenous Doctors, where I was CEO at the time, a campaign was born. The Close the Gap campaign for Indigenous health equality. The Council of Australian Government's response in 2008, in the form of a national agreement, carried the banner of Closing the Gap. And the change in language is important to note. The focus of our campaign from the outset was the destination, to close the gap. And governments were more cautious or maybe less ambitious, but the relabelling was to closing the gap. The destination versus the journey. And irrespective of these differences, in 2020, there was an unprecedented commitment made by governments to partner with the coalition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peak organisations. For the first time, a signatory external to Australian governments was in a national agreement, and this counts for a lot. All governments signed up, as well as the peak body representing local governments. In signing, governments committed to radical changes, a transformation of their structures, their systems and their staff. Not ad hoc or piecemeal, but planned, systemic, transformative. And in February this year, the Productivity Commission released its first report on the review of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. It was the culmination of 2 years of work with colleagues Nat Siegel-Brown and Michael Brennan as co-commissioners, and a deadly team led by Anna Markolev and Catherine Anderson, who's here today as well. This work was only possible because of strong and respectful engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities, as well as government and non-government bodies alike. In the reports forward, Nat and I wrote, most critically, the agreement requires government decision makers to accept that they do not know what is best for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Change can be confronting and difficult, but without fundamental change, the agreement will fail and the gap will remain. This is what's at stake. This report was about more than recycled proclamations. It was more than simple words that encourage government decision makers to listen and take action to do better. This was a magnifier on the lack of progress and the failure of governments to capture the immense opportunities presented within the national agreement. Once again, the report demonstrated how decision makers fell short in recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their priorities. And in response, the Commission provided a pathway forward. The Commission made 4 key recommendations in its report. First, that power needs to be shared. For meaningful progress towards closing the gap, governments must share power and recognise that self-determination is grounded in the right of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have control over decisions that affect their lives. Second, that Indigenous data sovereignty needs to be recognised and supported. The Commission said the agreement needs to be amended to include Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance. One recommended action was to establish a Bureau of Indigenous Data to support governments to embed Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance into their systems and practices, invest in enhancing data capability of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations and communities, and invest in Indigenous data infrastructure. Third recommendation, that mainstream systems and culture need to be fundamentally rethought. And the assessment was that governments have not fully grasped the scale of change required to deliver systems, culture and operations and ways of working to deliver the unprecedented shift that they committed to in the agreement. And this requires immediate action. The fourth and final recommendation was that stronger accountability needed to drive behaviour change. And the report outlines actions to strengthen and drive accountability. One was to urgently prioritise setting up independent mechanisms with robust legislative powers to examine progress on all aspects of the agreement. The agreement requires these independent mechanisms to be set up. Some will think about the agreement as a 10-year agreement. Next year we're halfway through that agreement. Not one independent mechanism has been established in any jurisdiction in this country. In July, the Joint Council on Closing the Gap agreed to all 4 recommendations, as well as 15 of the 16 actions sitting under the recommendations. The one action that Joint Council did not agree on was the Bureau of Indigenous Data. They agreed to do further work before deciding how to progress the action. It was unusual for governments, especially within Commonwealth state arrangements, to agree to so many recommendations so quickly. This is a testament to the work that has been done by the Commission to this point, and I would say in strong relationship with those who are most concerned about this work. But as history has shown us, a commitment can only get us so far. We need action, we need real change. At the heart of it all must be the people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and we must be at the centre of policy decision making, program design and implementation. It's as simple as that. We are not just another stakeholder in our futures, not just another cohort to consult with. We are not just another population group to cover or another segment of a market or a survey. We are first peoples of this place, with our sciences, our knowledges and our solutions. You may have been misled by reductive notions of who we are and what we are capable of. These are not simply the provenance of past racist policies. They play out in our daily interactions. We continue to be framed by others who are dismayed by their perception of a persistent negative state of being. And we continue to be impacted by the discomfort of others, those who find it easier to stay silent rather than challenge the status quo, the racist remark or the structural barriers that stand in the way of change. Palawa Professor Maggie Walter has characterised data about us as the 5 Ds. Difference, disparity, disadvantage, dysfunction and deprivation. These are the ways that mainstream narratives and data define, produce and report on the statistical indigeny. This data is largely numeric and seemingly objective, divorced from the aspirations and ambitions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and communities. Deficit discourse and negative narrative abound. Look no further than the contemporary media, and you also don't have to look far to find policy and research papers doing more of the same. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people painted as the problem, deserving to be in the situation we find ourselves in, or worse, not even being considered at all. Invisible and unheard, still echoing that great Australian silence that Stanner spoke about in his Boyer lectures over 50 years ago. Data that is devoid of the things that have relevance and meaning for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and so it continues. Individuals and peoples are problematised, systems and structures let off the hook. The Indigenous data sovereignty movement is the antidote to these continuing representations of First Peoples. The rise of Indigenous data sovereignty here and abroad directly challenges the preconceived and continuing reproductions of us as peoples, as communities, as families, as individuals. And in the absence of meaningful data, Indigenous people the world over are creating their own metrics, built on the foundations of Indigenous cultures, Indigenous languages, and Indigenous science. New initiatives with new architecture, delivering new insights, are well underway. Mea Kauayu is the largest national study of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, health and wellbeing, with over 13,000 respondents, 13,000, sharing their stories of identity, spirituality, connection to country, community and language. Maranuka, the first Aboriginal-led place-based model of justice reinvestment in Australia, is a leading example of Indigenous self-governance in Bourke, New South Wales. Young people's lives in Bourke have been changed forever because of Aboriginal people holding power in their spaces, with governments and others invited in by community and elders instead of the other way around. Local communities are more than holding conversations about what matters most. They are activating, and in doing so building metrics for their own learning, adaptation and empowerment. The centrality of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is encapsulated in the Productivity Commission's Indigenous Evaluation Strategies overarching principle for evaluations. That principle being centring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, perspectives, priorities and knowledges. If evaluations, research and policy are aiming to address a problem or answer a question in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the starting point is to think about who is asking the question, why does it matter and for whom. In practice, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people need to be the decision makers of what to evaluate and the development of evaluation questions, approaches, methods and practice, and importantly the interpretation of findings. In government, this also means ensuring Indigenous public sector leaders are at the highest levels. And thank you, Gordon, for being here tonight. Across the board, not just in Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific agencies. In much the same way as Indigenous approaches offer insights for the sustainability of the planet and the well-being of all people, so too do Indigenous ways offer insights for the public service, as well as corporate and non-government, and I would say philanthropy as well. To be places underpinned by culture and practice of relationality and reciprocity. Within the Australian Public Service context, the 100 First Nations Senior Executive Service target is a significant step forward. And I understand that meeting the target is well on the way. However, a recruitment target is one thing. In a highly competitive labour market with limited supply, retention and advancement will be the big issue to keep an eye on into the future. Ensuring workplaces are culturally safe is a necessary condition for success. Addressing institutional racism is a priority for every institution, for their own good and the good of people, not just because it's in the national agreement. We also need to be careful not to siphon black leadership from the community control sector. Movement across and between sectors, as I've done, can only be a good thing for public policy outcomes. So this sort of thing, orbiting. People, in centring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in policy, empowerment and action must also reside closer to the ground. People locally in their places and spaces know best. So for solutions to be successful, they must be place-based with strong local ownership. And for that to happen, we must wrestle a most valued commodity from Canberra and the other capital territories, state and territory capitals, that commodity being power. Often heard, not often seen, the subsidiarity principle needs elevation and activation, not just more lip service. Indigenous leaders know this and have been calling for it for generations. Public sector leaders have committed to it, whether under the banner of place-based approaches or local decision-making. It boils down to ensuring that people closest to the matter concerning them have the most say, that they have the power to set priorities, lead design and delivery, and assess outcomes. This requires systemic change, and for governments, for funders, for policymakers to relinquish power, to establish mechanisms that ensure to ensure people who are most impacted have the most say. The legitimacy of government rests on this. Trust, as we all know, is a currency and it deeply matters. The Commission's review found that the commitment to shared decision-making, a centrepiece of the agreement, is rarely achieved in practice. And while there are some examples of government sharing some decision-making in some circumstances, this is not evident more widely. The Commission also found that contrary to a principle of shared decision-making, there appears to be an assumption that government knows best. Barriers to power sharing often reside in the mindsets of individuals or the habits and rituals of institutions, not necessarily in breaches or threatened breaches to regulatory and administrative parameters. Individual resistance to sharing data, even when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations are partners in a data project, is a case in point. And we heard that in the review. There is nothing quite as damaging as one partner holding on to information to dissolve hard-earned trust. And as a latecomer to the study of economics, and I must confess one of the first books that I purchased when I started at the Commission was Economics for Dummies. It was a page-turner. So as a latecomer to the study of economics, I became familiar with the idea of information asymmetries. The Commission talks about this all the time. Or some having information when others don't, robbing parties of the ability to consider the range of available options and solutions, thus leading to unfair outcomes. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and organisations are all too familiar with this practice, and we suffer the consequences of bad decision making by others. Of course, there are notable exceptions. In Victoria, the First Peoples Assembly, Treaty Authority and Uruk Truth and Justice Commission are well advanced. South Australia has a voice to Parliament, and the ACT a legislated Indigenous elected consultative body. These arrangements have come about after years of hard work, negotiation and commitment to staying the course. Disappointingly, government commitment to the treaty and truth-telling process in Queensland looks to have come to an end. This is not stopping our mob in Cherbourg to continue with their own hearings. Having recently been with our mob in Meanjin in Brisbane, I witnessed the deep hurt and pain. Let's not forget that much power remains tightly held within non-Indigenous organisations, within the corridors and closed doors of bureaucracy, and within the cultures of bureaucracies and the staff who work in these places. Last year, we had the opportunity to change this trajectory of power and decision-making through a voice to Parliament. Remote Aboriginal communities overwhelmingly supported a constitutionally enshrined voice, in stark contrast to other parts of the country. Despite the result, the Uluru Statement from the Heart is as relevant and important now as before the referendum. And as much as the hurt and pain remains for so many, we will not be defined by the referendum outcome. We will continue to assert our rights as First Peoples, and where we go as a nation from here is dependent on all Australian citizens. Governments must transform deep and wide. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander decision-making must be valued and enabled. Structural changes must be made to ways that governments transfer power to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities and lay the groundwork for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander well-being and prosperity. So to prosperity. Some in our communities may react to prosperity as a word, thinking it's only about economics or material worth. But the prosperity agenda is family-centred, community-focused. It's a family-centred, community-focused agenda, relevant to local and regional spaces and firmly rooted in the daily lives of our people. Important work in this space has been done on Yorta Yorta country, led by Paul Briggs. The Goulburn Murray Regional Prosperity Plan, developed for the local Aboriginal think tank, the Kaila Institute, defines prosperity as a state of success. And this can be in terms of wealth, health, peace, self-determination, cultural strength and happiness. This is a ground-up definition. It encompasses Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, families and communities prospering as First Peoples, culturally, spiritually, economically. Their vision is to increase So it speaks to our worldview. It's relational and holistic, not individualistic and reductive. Their vision is to increase gross regional product through Yorta Yorta and First Nations economic inclusion, prosperity and shared value. And each of the 6 strategic themes has a prosperity goal. I'll skip through a bit of this because I know that we've got time. Each theme articulates expected outcomes, regional benefits and alignment to closing the gap targets. I mention this work to highlight the fact that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are designing futures in all sorts of sophisticated and systematic ways, and that governmental effort across all 3 levels must shift to a greater focus on supporting and enabling communities' priorities and plans to be realised. This has been long called for by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, whether through community councils, services and peak organisations, the empowered communities leadership and their regions, land councils, prescribed body corporates, black businesses, black entrepreneurs, policymakers and researchers. I've seen a growth in black businesses across this country, accelerated in some part by Indigenous procurement policies and the growing commercial nous of our people and organisations. As a judge of the recent Indigenous Governance Awards, I saw the strength of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations and communities under the stewardship of elders who hold cultural authority, and how they're showing the way on what excellence in governance looks like. And I do have to mention Gary Banks' name as the founding foundation, is that the right word? The first chair of the Productivity Commission. Gary was a judge on the Indigenous Governance Awards for many, many years, and I know how busy your job is, Danny, so I just did want to give a shout out, Gary being the chair of the commission as well as being a judge on the Indigenous Governance Awards. But look no further than the Winjiri Wiru Working Group, an Anangu committee who hold cultural authority and oversight of cultural experiences at Yulara. So the drone show depicting the Mala story, the rufous hair wallaby, is shared with the visitors from across the globe. It's a world-first cultural experience. A portion of revenue goes to 2 communities that are custodians of that chapter of that songline, that part of the story. Another, Jaranjan community, 200 kilometres north of Broome, became the first Aboriginal-owned airport in Western Australia in 2018. Jaranjan Aboriginal Corporation is largely self-funded through revenue from its airport operations, which supports other community priorities. These are just 2 of many examples of how our people are exemplifying excellence in governance, entering into significant commercial deals with joint venture partners and are suppliers of services to a range of consumers. I have come across more than a fair share of sceptics who say that notions of well-being measurement are simply soft, or measurement for well-being outcomes deliver nothing more than the conventional socio-economic outcomes or metrics. To this I say such metrics can only ever tell part of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander story. The tyranny of the aggregate, the decontextualised data, only serves to do more harm. The over-reliance on these metrics alone sells Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people short. They reinforce the statistical Aborigine or Indigene as the problem person. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are more than recipients of jobs and training programs, much more than partners at tables that do not truly value their knowledges, priorities and solutions, let alone their leadership and authority. We must recognise the limitations and inadequacy of some frameworks, including economic frameworks, to fully understand meaning, perspectives and outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The May Kauayu longitudinal study is a significant data asset that is offering valuable insights, published in the Lancet, globally recognised. Valuable insights, as do local surveys such as the Yarru Wellbeing Study. There is also significant and growing a significant and growing corpus of Indigenous-led research and evaluation, employing a range of methods, including Indigenous research methodologies. Our communities, our organisations, our business operate within complex cultural, social, regulatory and administrative contexts, but they're single-minded in securing strong futures for their grandchildren's grandchildren, with prosperities of families and communities at the core, utilising sophisticated toolkits, drawing on the best that Western and Indigenous knowledge systems can offer to achieve their goals. Our people's empowerment and prosperity goes hand in hand with strong spirit, strong culture and strong identity. We have strong mob. In closing, our elders, leaders and activists have fought long and hard for our recognition and demanded respect to maintain our culture and identity. They called out the brutality of our people's treatment, the degradation and humanity put upon our people in full consciousness and in full view, with the intention to wipe our old people from the face of their ancestral lands. Massacres and theft of our children, lives of enslavement and servitude. This is the truth of our past, the reality of our history, and it plays out in our everyday lives, our contemporary realities. And like it or not, this is a shared history between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and non-Indigenous people. The black nurse is not separate from this history. The black public servant is not separate from this history. The black kid in school is not separate from this history. And the non-Indigenous policy maker is not separate from this history. It is 1 year and 5 weeks since the referendum for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. In 2017, I was a delegate at Uluru, a signatory to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. In 2023, I voted yes, as did 6.2 million others. The defeat, the rejection, means we do not have a constitutionally enshrined voice. However, we are strong people and will continue to fight. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will have the most say in our futures, not just some say, even the first say, or perhaps not even the last say, but the most say. Where Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people are the designers, the builders, the practitioners, the evaluators of our futures. Where we prosper in the fullness of our talents, our ingenuity and in our indigeneity, in a nation where we are no longer positioned as problematic people, and where racism is for others to understand, call out and eradicate. Not for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to endure, to educate and to explain. Just as we cannot separate our histories, so too are our futures intertwined. We have a chance to ignite change from the ground up. For this to happen, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people must be at the centre of policy decision making, program design and implementation. We must tackle the imbalance and abuse of power at all levels of decision making. We must redefine our understanding of prosperity as a family-centred, community-focused agenda that is firmly rooted in the daily lives of our people. The well-being of our future generations depends on it. My final words are for Deb. I'm so grateful to be your partner in life. I'll get some water. I knew this would be the hardest part. I could not have done half as much as I have without you. You have been through my deepest worries. And my greatest joys. I thought I'd get through it. And to Georgia, who can't be here because she's got a better offer, which is she is I think the main character being filmed in a short film today in Victoria. So to Georgia in Lawn, Victoria, to Louis and Maya, you three inspire me in immeasurable ways, most of all to believe that there must and will be a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rom, for that incredibly powerful address. I'm tearing up too now. Delivered with your characteristic thoughtfulness and eloquence. I am now delighted to introduce Dr. Gordon de Brouwer, who's going to provide us with some reflections on Rom's speech. Gordon is the Australian Public Service Commissioner. He has a long and distinguished public service career, including as Secretary of the Public Sector Reform and Secretary of the Department of Environment and Energy. He is incredibly thoughtful on questions of effective government, and relevantly for tonight, he is leading the APSC's effort to improve cultural capability and First Nations representation across the public service. I cannot think of a better responder for tonight's event. Thank you, Gordon.
Well, that's very hard to follow, Rom. But like Danielle and Rom, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're on, and I also thank Paul for his powerful welcome to country. Thank you, Rom, for a very powerful oration, and thank you, Danielle, for the Productivity Commission's decision to create the Mokak Oration and for ensuring that Rom is its first orator. Can't be better named and can't be better presented. In a dynamic and pluralist society like ours, it's essential to recognise and celebrate the contributions of First Nations people that they make to public policy and tangibly to explore what lies ahead. We need conversations that leave us hungry to be a better nation and provide us with guidance on how to do that in a way that endures. So the Mokak Oration is a wonderful and great step forward. Rom has done this so well in today's superbly crafted and personal oration. My Public Service Commission colleagues, Sam Jeffries and Dr. Steve Munns, and I reflected on the version that Rom shared with us in advance. We found it powerful because the oration is expressed as a reflection of who Rom is. It recounts for a broader audience and validates what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people know, and it sets out the challenge we face as a nation in a nuanced and constructive way. That challenge is to close the gap and move beyond deficit discourse to empowerment and prosperity. At the Australian Public Service Commission, along with the National Indigenous Australians Agency with Jodie Bruin, we're taking this challenge in the areas for which we have responsibility very seriously. I'd like to just point to three, and you can hold our feet to the fire, is what we're asking. So the public service, as Ron mentioned, it is lifting the number of First Nations Senior Executive Service Officers, or SES officers, through the SES 100 initiative. At June 2023, there were 54 First Nations SES. A year later, by June 24, there were 85, from 54 to 85, and we estimate that the number is now currently in the low 90s. We've started a second recruitment round, which is open now, so please take note, and we're on track, I think, to well and truly achieve that 100 by June 25. What it does mean is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are responsible, they're active, and they're visible across the senior ranks of the Australian Public Service. Different world. The Public Service is also supporting increased employment by lifting cultural safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Public Service, and very explicit leadership development at both the SES and the executive levels. This is complemented by cultural capability training for non-Indigenous senior executives, and we're hardwiring this into the system as much as possible. And one way that we've hardwired that is to bring First Nations perspective to the central coordinating mechanism of the COO committee, or the Chief Operating Officers Committee within the service. That's the backbone of APS governance, and it's hardwired now with the First Nations voice in that. The public service is developing and implementing a widespread program of genuine partnership in engagement with First Nations communities. We have talked about this for so long and we haven't done it, but I think Jody can see that there is something shifting in the hardwiring of that in the system. And this represents a structural shift, and it's the start of something. It's not the end of it, but it's the start of something. So I genuinely believe that these are big changes. What you should know is that the secret to the success of these initiatives, and they are having more traction, is that they have been designed, led and implemented by First Nations public servants. It's a totally different way of management around it. So I hope that, Rom, you can keep our feet to the fire, and that in future orations, that if we've let you down, that you call that out. And I look forward, so congratulations again for today, for something really superb, and also for future orations in the coming forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gordon, for being here and providing the response. I would now like to invite Rom back up to the stage, as we have a small gift to share. We have been privileged to work with Aboriginal artist and proud Wiradjuri woman Lani Balzan on the artwork for tonight's oration. This vibrant artwork brings together the powerful gathering symbol, handprints, and the colours of the Jugun and the Yayu land to tell the story of Rom's significant contribution to the unity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within the broader Australian community. Rom, hang it proudly on your wall. That's fantastic, thank you. We won't do that. I don't know. You're supposed to have a photo, I don't know. Yes. Oh, when will we do this? That's better. One more? This side, yeah. That's good, thank you. Very quickly, I would just like to say a huge thank you to the staff involved in making this event happen. Michelle Cross, Kate Judd, Kath Hagan snapping away there, Julie Silex, Sal McCarthy, and to Tracy and Michelle, who so warmly welcomed us tonight from our Canberra office. Thank you. And thank you to all of you. This is an incredible room. Thank you for joining us to honour and to celebrate Rom and his achievements. I hope you will be back next year for the next Mokak Oration. And we have some drinks and canapes, so please stay and enjoy and continue the conversation. Thank you.